Across the internet, every single gaming community has its own language, its own way of showing love and frustration towards the games and the brands that they cherish. But among them, one group stands apart for a variety of reasons, and that is the Nintendo community on X. This community is fascinating for one very particular reason, and to put it crudely, that reason is bootlicking. This is a term that seems to crop up in every single Nintendo tweet thread, with people calling the fans that support the company corporate bootlickers for a variety of reasons. But why have they garnered this perception? Why is this term used so frequently to describe an entire fandom? First off, the idea that a Nintendo fandom exists in general is kind of crazy. Most times when people are in the gaming sphere, they tend to have this close connection with individual gaming IPs or experiences rather than an entire brand. For example, there are Sonic fans. When doing a quick poll on my Twitter account asking, hey, are you a Sega fan, which is the company that produces Sonic, or are you a Sonic fan, the overwhelming response was not in favor of being a Sega fan. The idea that any fandom exists in gaming in this way that encompasses effectively every IP created by a gaming company and not just individual IPs or experiences, that's strange. That is not usual. So that's kind of a general idea. It seems like Nintendo fans have a deeper emotional connection to the company brand, more so than other fan groups within a similar sphere. But how do we actually test this to see if it's true? The way I decided to test this was by grabbing 3 different tweets from the Nintendo of America Twitter account that has about 14.2 million followers. One of these tweets was a trailer for the Nintendo Switch 2, the other was a smaller announcement, that being new social icons for Nintendo Switch profile accounts, and then one throwaway tweet from the account that just had a screen grab from the new Mario Kart game with a silly joke attached to it, nothing serious. I then scoured the PlayStation official Twitter account that, by the way, has 42.4 million followers to try and grab tweets that fit a similar description as the ones that I grabbed from Nintendo. My first interesting result was that I couldn't find a single tweet from the PlayStation account that had a joke being made at all. Just anywhere. I couldn't find one. It was all business, no fun. Immediately, this showcased a massive difference between the philosophy being shown by Nintendo versus the philosophy being shown by PlayStation. Nintendo likes to have fun, make some jokes, a little bit of lighthearted stuff here and there. PlayStation, no, they're all serious, no BS, all business, okay? Other than that, I actually found a tweet announcing the PS5, which is their most recent system, as well as a tweet of them announcing a smaller announcement, that being the addition of new COD maps. And then I did a deep dive. I looked at pretty much every single reply from every single one of these tweets. It took absolutely forever. It took so long. In every single instance, on every single one of the comparison tweets, comparing the replies of Nintendo tweets to the replies of PlayStation tweets, the Nintendo fandom used terminology and acted in ways that symbolized a more personal connection with that brand, as if they were interacting with just another user on the platform and not a massive multi-million-dollar brand. For example, in these small announcement tweets from PlayStation, there were 2 things I noticed that were different from Nintendo tweets. One, there was so much less interaction in the reply section on the PlayStation tweet, and it wasn't even close. Threads effectively did not exist, meaning community members were not replying to each other, and the words being used to talk to the PlayStation account were all very cold. For example, there seemed to be a mini movement going on in the replies from individual accounts saying, "We want Turkish language support in Death Stranding 2!" There seems to be more of a mentality that, hey, you're a company and this is what I want from you, end of story, communication over. No replies to the tweets, no replies to other tweets, just asking for things that they want as a consumer and getting out of there. The language seen in these replies and the lack of interaction between accounts showcases that there is not a sense of connection underneath the brand. And then you hop over to the Nintendo tweets. You can already see that community interaction is far better for Nintendo than on the PlayStation side of things. There's just more likes, more replies, more of everything. Then, when you go into the replies, you'll start to notice a stark difference between the way people were talking to PlayStation and the way people were talking to Nintendo. There were a lot of informal ways of interacting with the company. There are lots of GIFs and image reactions, weird jokes that I really don't think most people would put underneath company threads on a normal basis, at least, alright? And it just keeps going on. The community interaction is not only present, but it is thriving. The informal discussion circulating around the brand and the friendly interactions being sent in the company's direction showcases a completely different perspective than was seen on the PlayStation tweet. Nintendo's brand has become an informal space. Informal enough for things like this to thrive, at least. The only types of posts underneath the Nintendo tweets that I could find that held a similar kind of, hey, you're a company and this is what I want from you style, which again was incredibly prevalent in the PlayStation tweet replies, were posts that were asking Nintendo to lower the prices of the Nintendo Switch 2. This is a part of an anti-Nintendo movement where people want the price of the Switch 2 that they announced just recently and the games that come on it to drop. And even in these scenarios where people are asking for the company to make changes that users believe will benefit them, there are replies that are making fun of people asking for this change. Defense of PlayStation was not there. Period. End of story. Most of the replies were actively against PlayStation. Very few comments with mildly negative things to say about the company go unnoticed and unreplied to. There seems to be a desire to go up to bat for Nintendo that is not present in PlayStation's reply section. So this is great. We are already starting to see a massive difference in the way that the Nintendo community interacts with their brand versus the way that the PlayStation community interacts with their brand. But also, I didn't really want all of my observations to be looking down on a tweet thread and waxing poetic about why people are responding to specific things in specific ways and what that could potentially signify. I also wanted to do a small survey where I asked some Nintendo community members, some of which had incredibly large followings, how they felt about the fandom and how long they had been within it. This way I could get a better understanding of the behind-the-scenes aspects of the fandom that I can't really glean from simple observations. When it came to how long people had interacted with the brand of Nintendo as a fandom, there were some outliers with fans that had just started interacting with the brand as a fandom in the last 8 or so years, but the more consistent lower end of active users in the Nintendo X fandom was around 15 years of Nintendo content consumption. Once again, that's the lower end. The higher end had people consuming the content since the 90s, so there's an incredibly deep connection to these properties due to long-term exposure. And then I asked 2 questions back to back. One of them was, hey, what do you like about the fandom? And the response there was pretty consistent. People like talking to people that had similar interests to them, pretty much the reason a lot of people join fandoms. But the next question is what I found far more fascinating. When I asked what the worst part of the fandom was, that too was consistent across the board of the 15 or so people that I messaged individually on the platform. People in the community tend to be way too invested in the success of the company, defending things like those prices, seeming to panic if certain games aren't being advertised as much as they'd like, things like that. As for the bad, some of us Nintendo fans can get really uppity when someone says something bad about any games they like, as well as some of us generally being bootlickers sometimes. That's easy. It's the people whose perspective on the medium of video games is exclusively built on their experience with Nintendo games, which creates a warped perspective and set of expectations. It's difficult to have good faith discussions with that demographic of Nintendo fan, and feels like they enable Nintendo to get away with anti-consumer practices by supporting them even when they don't deserve it. I'd say the worst part of the Nintendo fandom is the inability to acknowledge Nintendo's flaws at times. The best example of this is Nintendo's constant overpricing of games. Luigi's Mansion 2 HD being full priced at $60 when the original on 3DS only a few years prior started at $40 and went down to $20 later, yet if you bring it up, a lot of fans will get at you for it. Once again, it was consistent across the board. My question was, what is the worst part of the Nintendo fandom? There was no attempt to lead people to these answers. This was just what I got. Too much corporate bootlicking. Even within the Nintendo fandom, there seems to be this acknowledgement that they allow the company to get away with too much and stifle constructive conversation that occurs in opposition to the company's success. There seems to be a need to defend whenever it comes to the company, even if what they're defending seems to have an adverse effect on their own consumption of content being produced by the company. There's a closeness there that sparks vehement community protection of the entire brand of Nintendo. What could be causing this? This is where we start getting into the nitty-gritty of it, the academic side of things, alright? So stick with me, I swear it'll make sense. I'm going to be focusing on two different academic concepts that I think really hammer home why this closeness to the company could exist. First one, I'm sure you've heard of, is parasociality. You've probably heard this applied to internet personalities and TV personalities, but not heard it applied to a company before. But I swear, it makes sense here, and there is value in it being discussed. So as we saw, Nintendo seems to be leaning more towards a designed informality that's being used to make users interact with their company's persona in the same way that they would a figure that they know on the platform. That is, they're creating this bond of intimacy that effectively only extends from one direction, from the fans, to garner more consistent interaction and more personal interaction, such as gifts, the jokes, whatever that joke was. And to link this to some literature, there's a piece by Donald Horton and Richard Wohl. In their essay Mass Communication and Parasocial Interaction, they discuss the existence of a persona that's created for mass media personalities that's used to create that bridge of intimacy between the persona and the audience. Nintendo seems to have, as a brand, curated a persona that serves a similar role that bolsters informal interaction. This parasociality to the persona seems to exist and be incredibly prevalent here. The second academic concept I want to bring into this is a bit harder to follow, so stick with me. Ontological security. What even is that? What is that? This is a concept that was coined by Anthony Giddens in his work The Self, Ontological Security and Existential Anxiety. So what is the general idea of ontological security? The idea is that there is a sense of security that's derived from early childhood that forms a stability and continuity in one's experience of the world. How does this relate to fan studies? Well, according to Giddens' piece, when this ontological security is disrupted through chaos or anxiety, it places that security into question and can create a variety of relatively irrational and visceral responses. Nintendo is a company with an incredibly solid track record that has been around for years, and most people have been consuming their content since a young age, as seen in the discussions that I had with peers within the community. As a result, many of the properties and the very existence of the company itself exists within the realm of fans' early lives and has become a part of their stable worldview. Nintendo will always be there, and it will always provide content that can be used as an escape from whatever's happening in their life. That is a constant. However, when Nintendo drama does crop up, it can be seen as the chaos that interrupts their ontological security, and thus the replies to this chaos can be very aggressive, emotional, and dismissive. This concept is most likely what has led the Nintendo fan community on X to develop the negative perception of bootlicking that surrounds it. Attacks on the brand are attacks on the stability of Nintendo fans' worldview. So overall, Nintendo fans seem to have this very interesting close connection to the brand that doesn't really exist in many other places within the gaming community. This is one of the more fascinating areas of fan studies that I feel goes a little under-examined, so I hope this was at the very least interesting and some food for thought. Especially if you're watching this as someone who interacts with the Nintendo fandom, keep an eye out. See if this analysis holds up.